Hi, Waimama. We're welcoming today Kent Bailey, who is group chairperson of the Tampa Bay Sierra Club.
So, what is the Sierra Club for those who don't know?
Hi, well, thank you for having me here. The Sierra Club is the nation's oldest and largest environmental organization. We've got millions of members worldwide. The Tampa Bay group has almost 20,000 people on our list of supporters and members. And the club was founded over 125 years ago by John Muir, who was a naturalist and something of a philosopher. He was in Florida about 130 years ago. He trekked across Florida from the East Coast over to Cedar Key and nearly died there before ever going on to do any of his Sierra Club things. And as he was recovering there it still stands an old oak tree where he had what was at that time the epiphany to understand that man was actually a part of nature, as opposed to the prevailing sense at the time in this country that man was put by God to have dominion over nature. John Muir actually came to the realization that we are not only a part of nature, but we are inseparable from nature, and when you put barriers between human beings and nature, the human beings and nature both suffer.
Well, he also trekked in California.
Yes.
He was quite active there.
Yes, he was. The Sierra Club actually was incepted and founded to resist the damming of the Hetch Hetchy Valley, which is adjacent to and very similar to the Yosemite Valley. And some say that it even was more beautiful and more precious a resource than Yosemite Valley. It was eventually, it was proposed that that dam be built there for a water project to supply year-round water to, I believe it was the Los Angeles area, but one of the major metropolitan areas there in California. He came to the idea that if people could travel to this place of great natural beauty and experience it firsthand, they'd come to understand exactly what was at stake in preserving this. And so he started the Sierra Club practice of outings, where people would go out and see these things and guided into wilderness areas. You know, at the time we didn't have our wonderful public television stations with Nature and National Geographic and so forth, and there really wasn't much, there were no roads, for example, that would take you in there. So it was essential that people see this firsthand in order to understand what was at stake. Tragically, he was not successful in preventing the Hetch Hetchy Dam from being built and the valley from being flooded, and he died, some say of a broken heart, shortly after the dam was put in place. However, he left in place a legacy of environmental activism and set the pattern for the Sierra Club that we follow this day of explore, enjoy, protect is our motto. So we take people out into the wilderness. We certainly enjoy the wild spaces, and we protect it. We're the most litigious environmental organization in the nation. We are deeply involved in politics because the solutions to our environmental problems are frankly political, especially today.
You would agree with that?
Yep.
I know we already asked you before we started recording, are you a native of Florida? And you responded no.
No, I came to Florida though in 1968, and my family moved down to the shores of Lake Okeechobee to take over operation of a fish camp, motel, restaurant, boat dock. We rented boats. We served as a base for fishing guides to go out. It was a pretty real immersion into Florida environment for a 17-year-old kid from central Kentucky. I had never seen anything like it, and honestly, if you were not on Lake Okeechobee in the late 60s, before the channelization of the Kissimmee River, you really don't understand what we've lost. The natural beauty, the wildlife. I saw flocks of birds that were so massive and so dense that they absolutely covered the sky with waves of color. As the birds banked and changed directions, their feathers would reflect the light differently, and those numbers of birds just don't exist there anymore. And the lake itself has been so severely degraded, both by the impacts of the channelization of the Kissimmee River, which removed the natural filtering that goes place, plus the fact that we've frankly tended to use it as an agricultural cesspool for Central Florida. The agricultural runoff coming from the north has been very damaging, and then they backpumping from the sugarlands to the south of extremely nutrient polluted waters has frankly. Though I took my two sons down. I have 6 children, but I took my 2 sons down on a fishing camping trip down there in the 90s, and having myself spent a lot of time there, I even was a fishing guide there for a little bit, I couldn't even find my way around anymore. The impact on the environment of the nutrient pollution had created floating islands of water hyacinths and other vegetative debris that was supporting trees that were 20 or 30 feet tall. I couldn't recognize any of the existing landmarks, and you couldn't even tell what was land and what was just floating, rotting vegetation. It was incredible.
And of course, this is affecting on both sides of Lake Okeechobee, the towns. It's putting out pollution and killing off tourism. Perhaps you could speak about that.
Yes, Florida in the last few years in particular has been cursed with 2 environmental disasters along the southern portions of our coast, both on the east and west side. We've had to deal with red tide,
yes,
and we've had to deal with green slime. The red tide is due to nutrient pollution coming from the Mississippi River largely and circulating around with the Gulf Stream and comes off our shores here and does massive fish kills in the marine environment. And then the green slime, which is due to freshwater nutrient pollution flowing out the St. Lucie to the east and the Caloosahatchee River to the west, where it kills turtles, manatee, dolphins, all kinds of fish and birds and wildlife. Our current governor, to his credit, I will have to say, seems to have understood the economic impact that this kind of pollution has had on the economy. It is tourist-based businesses have suffered tremendously. Property values have gone down. Residents who live there have suffered all kinds of health impacts. There is a very significant and substantial cost to polluting Florida.
And is there a chance that any of this could happen up here in Tampa?
We have always going to have to be on guard on the freshwater side. Tampa has done an excellent job of limiting runoff from lawns, fertilizer. Mm-hmm. We have the summertime rainy season fertilizer ban. Hillsborough County hasn't followed with that. We have Friends of the River and Sierra Club work very closely together to protect water quality in Hillsborough County and in the Hillsborough River, which is a real gem. We do need to be very mindful of the impacts of phosphate mining. Massive, massive, massive gypstacks on the banks of Tampa Bay, which are absolutely long-term unsustainable. They will collapse. They're big piles of toxic waste that are the result of converting rock phosphate into fertilizer. And it's radioactive, it's got all kinds of dangerous chemicals in it, and there have been breaches where pollution from gypstacks in the past have flowed into the bay and caused massive fish kills. There have been other instances where operations of the phosphate industry have caused impact in, for example, in the Peace River. You know, we had massive fish kills there. So we need to address, in addition to being constantly vigilant, those gyp stacks are going to have to go. And somebody's going to have to pay a lot of money for it. And it ought to be, in my opinion, that's an expense that ought to be borne by the phosphate industry.
Yes.
Absolutely.
And with your strategy as the Sierra Club, what reasonable economic bend on the governor and the state would you expect? I mean, do you expect to piece this in small moments at a time?
Well, we use all the regulatory mechanisms at our disposal to try and limit pollution from all industries. We don't just pick on the phosphate industry. But the last election, we saw something really remarkable happen. And since then, polling has indicated that fully 76 to 80% of America's voters now regard climate change and environmental issues as extremely important. It is something that has finally taken hold after many, many years of educating the public and talking to people about this. The understanding that environmental issues have a major impact on our economy is sinking in. The upside of tragedies like Hurricane Wilma and the hurricane that drowned Texas and destroyed hurricane that, Maria that wiped out Puerto Rico. People have now come to understand that climate change is real. It's here now. We're suffering the impacts of this ongoing, slowly unfolding disaster, and it is very, very expensive. The only thing worse, let me back up a second. People sometimes say that the only thing more expensive than dealing with climate change is not dealing with climate change. I appreciate that sentiment, but in all honesty, for Florida at least, which is where I'm most familiar, but I suspect this is true across the country, transitioning to renewable energy and going to carbon-free, 100% renewable energy is going to be a tremendous economic boom to Florida. The renewable energy, for example, already employs more people than gas, oil, and coal combined, and jobs in solar industry are growing 12 times as fast as jobs in the general economy broadly. The estimates vary, but the lowest estimate I've seen is 300,000 new permanent jobs in Florida from the transition to renewable energy to as high as 500,000 new permanent jobs in Florida. And these are jobs that are of regular blue-collar, mostly working-class jobs. Average rate of a solar installer nationally is $26 an hour. And 2/3 of those positions don't require any post-secondary education at all. Almost a quarter, 28% are women, 17% are Latino Hispanic, 7% African American, so 24% are minorities, and 9% of the solar workforce are veterans. This is a deliberate, immediate transition to renewable energy will honestly be the biggest boon to the state of Florida since the invention of air conditioning. And I mean that literally.
Wow. What kind of restrictions are in place right now that is preventing us from transitioning into solar?
Florida is one of only 4 states that prohibit third-party sales of energy to the grid. What this means in real terms is a farmer in Florida cannot do what a farmer in Georgia can do, where in Georgia, farmers make, depending on their situation, as much as $1,400 per acre per year doing what's called solar farming. This is regular money coming into the farmer, rain or shine, year in, year out. Now, I grew up on a farm in Kentucky. Okay, we got paid there 3 times a year. We got paid when we sold the tobacco, we got paid when we sold the calves, and we got paid when we sold the pigs. We never knew exactly when we were going to get paid, and we never knew exactly how much we were going to get paid. If we could have gotten anything like the kind of money from solar farming that they're getting in Georgia right now, I'd probably yet be on that farm. The other impact of that is that in Florida, landlords who have these wonderful roofs cannot put solar panels on their roof and sell electricity to their tenants. Now they do that in Georgia. They do that in everywhere else except 3 other states in Florida. So the net impact of that is this: to transition to a renewable energy is going to require a massive expansion of, we're going to need rooftops, and we're going to need ground, but we're going to need also battery storage. Now, in other parts of the country, an entrepreneur can take his own good money and buy renewable energy equipment, which in Florida will be solar panels, can buy, if he chooses, power walls, batteries, and create his own mini utility company there. But actually what he's doing is supplementing the existing grid with renewable energy. And you can't do that in Florida. And this is the dilemma TECO faces. Now, in order for TECO to go 100% renewable under the existing regulations, they're going to have to provide all the solar panels, they're going to have to provide all the batteries, and they're going to have to make all this work. Florida is still operating under a 20th century grid system, which slowly evolved over 100 years. It wasn't so much designed as it was accreted. It was something that, year by year, decade by decade, it was built on, added to. We actually have a number of grids nationally that are loosely interconnected, but regionally regulated. National Security and Assured U.S. Power Report, which was created by a think tank that that is made up of retired generals and admirals. They work for the Pentagon. They provide the Pentagon with documents, papers, reports on matters of strategic importance to the United States. They created a report recently called the National Security and Assured U.S. Electrical Power Report. And in that report, these retired generals and admirals, speaking from a national security point of view now, they said that the United States electrical grid must change. They say this for a number of reasons. It's about a $5 billion replacement cost for what we have now. It will be replaced in the near future because parts of it are 100 years old. All of it is nearing the end of its service life. Like anything else, it wears out and is in need of modernization from time to time. So this group produced this report, and they say in this report that it would be very, very unwise to replace the existing spoken hub system with the distributed energy system, which brings us back, for Florida, that brings us back to the fact that we're one of only 4 states in the nation that do not allow third-party sales to the grid. A distributed energy system, instead of being spoken hub, is lots of little cells that are all interconnected intelligently, but they're able to operate independently if necessary. This creates a grid that is much more able to withstand threats from natural disasters. In Puerto Rico, the only hospital that kept the lights on was the one that had a microgrid, a solar power microgrid that kept them going. They were the only people that had electricity anywhere around there. And it was because they had a microgrid in place. The United States military uses microgrids in forward operating bases and in military installations all over the world because it is cost effective, it is resistant to failure, what is called in the military kinetic attacks, which simply means people blowing it up. We've had several attacks on our electrical infrastructure in the United States already. The total was up to 14 significant cyber attacks on our grid. And in this report they mentioned that there are 55,000 critical links in our national grid, and that as few as 9 could put the lights out for a large region or maybe even the entire United States for a matter of days or possibly weeks. We are that vulnerable. And that's why these retired generals and admirals are concerned about this. They also say in that report that continuing to rely on the current grid simply is not an option. And they say, and I'm quoting, renewable distributed energy is not just a policy objective for the United States military, it is an operational imperative, close quote. And by that they mean for domestic security, renewable distributed energy inside the United States that will be able to withstand cyber attacks. They point out that our enemies know where these vulnerabilities are and they are willing to exploit them. And we know we're going to be facing more storms like Wilma as we go forward. I've heard someone from the weather people say that going forward we have to consider the possibility of creating a Category 6 hurricane because Category 5 is just not sufficient to describe some of the hurricanes that are coming now that I refer to as 21st century superstorms.
Yeah.
Our grid is so vulnerable right now that having these storms put the lights out for weeks or months at a time is just economically devastating.
It's amazing. Just to add a little part, I come from California. We had grids on our roof. We had like 13 of them. They supplied more electricity. We sold it back. We leased. We didn't have to buy them. To buy them, like $33,000, at least at that point. We just leased them from a company, which they took care of them. They cleaned them. It works in California. It can work here. I think we paid $52 a month for the lease on the grids. $52 a month.
Incredible.
Now we still had to pay our taxes on our electric bill and whatever charges they put in, but we came out. I mean, we were paying $800 a month for electricity in the heat in the summer, and our bill went down to $52 plus whatever the electric bill charges, taxes were. So It can work. It does work in California. I'd love to see it come here.
As far as in terms of domestic energy use is concerned, your household electricity, there are a number of companies in the Bay Area right now who will install on your roof if you don't have too many trees that are shading it and one thing and another. But if you have an appropriately sited rooftop, at no cost to you, they will install solar panels on your roof and guarantee that for the term of the loan to pay off the cost of the solar panels, your total bill will be no more and probably less than what you're paying now. And then at the end of 6, 7, 8 years, the solar panels are paid for, and you have another 15 years or who knows of free electricity at that point.